We've all been there, right? Sitting in a classroom, maybe taking a quiz to figure out if our brain prefers to absorb information in a specific, unique way. For decades, students have been told they are visual learners, auditory learners, or kinesthetic learners. Teachers attended countless workshops. Parents leaned on these labels to really understand their kids. Honestly, the idea became one of the most widely accepted concepts in modern education. But where did this idea actually come from? And why do cognitive scientists keep questioning it? Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to investigate the evidence behind one of education's most enduring beliefs, and together we'll piece together this fascinating mystery. So, here is the central mystery of our investigation. What if one of the absolute most popular ideas in education isn't actually supported by the evidence? Look, if you've always believed in learning styles, you are definitely not alone. It's an idea that has shaped classrooms and student identities all over the world. But as we're about to discover, overwhelming popularity and hard scientific evidence are not always the same thing. These labels are incredibly familiar to us. Even though there are literally over 70 different tools out there for classifying learning styles, the heavy hitters usually tell us that some people are visual learners who absolutely need pictures, some are auditory learners who soak things up by listening, and others are kinesthetic learners who just have to move and do. The whole fundamental premise is that our complex individual differences can be perfectly captured by these neat little diagnostic boxes. Which brings us to our first really crucial question. Why did so many people believe this? Well, to understand why learning styles remain so incredibly popular, we first need to understand why the idea feels so convincing in the first place. And it's not because people are easily fooled. Not at all. It's actually because human psychology makes this concept highly appealing to us. The real appeal of it is perfectly captured by this thought. It feels intuitive. It feels compassionate. It suggests that every learner is unique. And, it really does. Think about it. If a student clearly prefers a colorful video over a dense textbook, that preference feels deeply meaningful. Learning styles offer this really comforting, simple explanation for academic struggles. It tells us that if a student is failing, well, maybe they just haven't been taught in their specific style yet. It directly appeals to our deep, very human desire to unlock a child's hidden potential. And this belief absolutely isn't limited to just primary schools or the general public. Look at the data from a survey of academics in UK higher education. We're talking about university-level experts here, and a solid majority, 58% of academics, still believe in the concept of learning styles. The idea has seeped so deeply into our educational culture that it persists even among highly educated researchers. But here is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. Because while 58% of those academics believe in learning styles, only 33% actually apply them in their classrooms. That is a massive drop-off, right? It hints at a pretty significant gap between what sounds theoretically good on paper and what actually holds up in everyday practice. And honestly, it's exactly this gap that finally prompted researchers to put the whole theory under a microscope. Which brings us to our second big question. What does the evidence actually show? Researchers decided to test a really simple premise. If learning styles are genuinely real, then matching the instruction to a student's preferred style should consistently improve their test results. Now, in the scientific community, this concept has a very specific name. It's called the meshing hypothesis. In plain English, it's the claim that instruction is best provided in a format that perfectly matches the preferences of the learner. So, for example, if you provide a diagnosed visual learner with highly visual instruction, they should theoretically perform significantly better than if they were just given verbal instruction. To prove that learning styles actually work, researchers noted you absolutely must prove this specific interaction through randomized controlled testing. So, what happened when they finally tested this? Well, the results surprised a lot of experts. The expectation was that matching a visual learner with visual teaching would equal high performance. But the reality? Across a massive, sweeping review of 2,500 meta-analyses, the average effect size of matching instruction to learning styles was 0.04. Let that sink in for a second. In the world of educational research, an effect size of 0.04 is essentially zero. It literally means that matching teaching to a learning style has practically no impact whatsoever. Now, you might be wondering, wait, what about the studies that do claim learning styles work? Digging into the literature reveals a pretty stark reality. This is actually one of the most methodologically flawed areas in educational psychology. The studies supporting it are routinely plagued by poor design, calculation errors, and incredibly low validity. Sadly, what distinguishes this from other, more rigorous research areas isn't scientific inquiry. It's aggressive commercial bias from vendors who are out there selling learning style assessments and guidebooks. At this point, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, fine, maybe it doesn't magically boost test scores, but surely it's totally harmless to let kids just think of themselves as visual or auditory learners, right? Well, unfortunately, cognitive scientists point out a very real, completely unintended danger to using these labels. And it brings us to a really troubling implication. As researchers note, learning styles become a euphemism for ability grouping, cloaked in pseudoscientific legitimacy. When we casually label a student a kinesthetic learner, it can so easily become shorthand for what they supposedly can't do. Teachers might unintentionally lower their expectations, assuming that kid just can't handle complex, traditional reading tasks. And worse, that label sticks to the student, creating artificial, totally unnecessary limits on their own potential. So if learning styles aren't the answer, what works better? Let's shift our focus over to the evidence, because when we strip away the myth, we are actually left with some incredible, heavily research-backed tools from cognitive science, tools that actually lower cognitive load and improve memory for literally all students, completely regardless of their supposed learning style. One of the absolute most powerful tools we have is called dual coding. Now, this involves conveying information using distinct verbal and nonverbal cognitive systems together to reduce cognitive load. You see, our working memory is highly limited, but cognitive science shows us that we process verbal information, like words, in a completely different system than nonverbal information, like images. By presenting information using both of those systems at once, we basically unlock more total working memory. To see exactly how this works in practice, think about processing written words like, "it was a sunny day," through your verbal system, while your nonverbal system simultaneously processes a simple, clear image of the sun. Dual coding isn't about catering to a visual learner. It's just the scientific reality that when any human brain processes those written words right alongside that visual image, the concepts connect, the cognitive load drops significantly, and memory is fundamentally strengthened. Take graphic organizers as another great example. Think of a Venn diagram categorizing animals. Again, this is not just some crutch for someone with a specific visual learning style. Graphic organizers use spatial relationships to quickly, effectively convey really complex ideas, making invisible structures totally explicit. Instead of forcing a student to juggle heavy paragraphs of text in their limited working memory, the diagram does the heavy lifting, freeing up their brain to actually analyze those relationships. The crucial takeaway here is that we really need to replace static, limiting labels with highly adaptive strategies. Evidence-based alternatives include things like dual coding, retrieval practice, which is the act of actively recalling information from your memory, and argument mapping. But honestly, perhaps the single most important strategy is aligning your instruction to the actual subject matter. Think about it. If you're teaching geometry, use visual diagrams because geometry is inherently visual. The teaching method should always match the material, not a perceived hardwired style of the student. All of this leads us to a highly encouraging conclusion. The really good news about debunking the learning styles myth is that learning itself is far more flexible than we ever believed. Human brains are remarkably adaptable. We are not rigid little machines that only accept data through one specific input port. We are highly capable learners who benefit immensely from a wide variety of strategies, contexts, and tools. When we finally let go of the labels, we free learners to experience the world in so many multiple, rich ways. I really want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider. What kind of potential could we unlock if we just stopped putting learners into neat little boxes and started giving them actual tools instead? Education always moves forward when we are willing to honestly test our most comfortable ideas and replace them with what actually truly works. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.